Hello and welcome to Colred Plays Raid Shadow Legends. I am Colred. Thank you for joining me. The November Fusion Champion launched this morning. So in today's video, we are going to review Ugar the Wormeater from the Ugar faction. And we're also going to take a look at the Fragment Event calendar so we can make our Fusion event plan. There's a lot of information to cover, so let's get started. Okay, here he is, Ugar the Wormeater. You can see he's got some kind of Lizardman faction skin on his back as a cape. He's wearing this skull. I couldn't actually find a match for this skull, so I don't think this is a specific Lizardman. But he does have some hatred for the Lizardman faction. We'll see that in his kit. If we take a look at his stats, these are solid stats for an HP-based champion. 22.8k HP, that's a nice healthy HP pool. Good defense at 1288, good speed at 105, even a little bit of extra resist and accuracy in the kit. Now, if we took a look at the A1 Worm Wrath, this attacks one enemy, and when booked, it has a 100% chance of stealing a random buff from the enemy. It also has a 100% chance of placing a block buff's debuff on the enemy for 2 turns. This is an unusual A1. We don't typically see block buffs on the A1. The stealing a random buff from the enemy, we've seen that before. But I don't know that there's another champion in the game that has block buffs on a 100% chance on the A1. It's not an AoE, it's just a single target. But for an A1, this seems highly unusual and potentially very powerful. You can use this against every single boss in the game that gets a buff, and potentially just stop those bosses from getting those buffs. At the very least, I can think for Demon Lord Clan Boss, this could be useful. Likewise, this could be useful for Hydra Clan Boss if you can land this on the Head of Mischief. And there are also some other bosses in Doom Tower who make use of buffs here. So this is a decent PvE A1, but it could also be a pretty solid PvP A1, especially if you have him on a team that is very tanky. If you have a go second tanky team, he could potentially get a lot of usage out of this A1. So this feels like a very good A1, and I actually think this is pretty good value on a legendary champion who we can all get for free. If we look at the A2, this is an AoE on a 3-turn cooldown that has a 100% chance of removing all buffs from all enemies. Then it also has a 100% chance of placing the larger weaken debuff on all enemies for 2 turns. Now, I don't expect that this is going to hit very hard. And if you already have Wukong, you may not need another buff strip champion. They're also the same affinity. Wukong and Ugar are both Spirit Affinity. But this is a highly unusual skill in the game, actually. To have a 100% weaken on an AoE is fairly solid. There are a few champions who've had that, but throw in the buff removal, and this feels like a nice, powerful, legendary A2. I could see this being used in Arena. It could certainly get a lot of use in faction crypts. And likewise, it does feel like a potential Hydra clan boss skill. Getting an AoE weaken out there increases your damage, and having a backup to remove more buffs from the Hydra bosses is always a good idea. The A3 is called Ugar Fortitude. This places a 50% increased accuracy buff on all allies for 2 turns. This is also on a 3-turn cooldown. And then it places either increased defense or increased attack, depending on basically the stats of the allies on the team. Now, this is a little bit of a weird skill. This is similar to Quargon's skill. Quargon is an epic in the Lizardman faction who also places either increased defense or increased attack in this same manner. Theoretically, it makes it a more versatile skill because you can use it with any kind of damage dealer in the arena. But in PvE, it makes it a little bit trickier because you have to really consider which champions you're bringing in and which buffs you're going to get for those champions. Everybody can use increased defense against things like Clan Boss and Hydra Clan Boss, whereas not everybody gets value out of increased attack, or not every team composition gets much value out of increased attack. Still, I think the increased accuracy here is interesting. You could potentially turn off this skill if you don't like it or don't need it, but increased accuracy can be useful in Hydra Clan Boss, it can be useful in high levels of Doom Tower, and it can be useful in Arena. So I don't think this is as good as the other 2 skills, but it still has a place in the game. Now, moving on to the passive Scourge of Dragons. Whenever an enemy is revived, this instantly activates Earth Puncture, which is the A2 that has the buff strip and the weaken. If an enemy is revived by a champion from the Lizardman faction, the effects of Earth Puncture cannot be resisted. So here is where that hatred of the lizardmen comes in. If you get revived by a lizardman, or I'm sorry, if the enemy gets revived by a lizardman, then Earth Puncture cannot be resisted. Now, that's not necessarily that big a deal in terms of the non-resistance, because if he's a debuffer, you're probably going to build him with enough accuracy to make the debuffs land. But it does allow for some additional effectiveness here, that increased resistance or high resistance champions won't be able to resist the Earth Puncture effects here, which in this case are, remember, stripping the buffs off of the enemy and landing that weaken. Now, the buff strip is important because a lot of revives, active revives, have a buff with that revive. So it may be an increased defense, it may be a shield, it may be a strengthen, it may be a block damage. All of those are skills that can, in fact, accompany a revive. So removing those buffs would just make it easier to kill those champions that were just revived. So this passive effect will only activate when an enemy is revived using an active skill. That means this won't activate against champions like Wukong who have a passive revive, or a Lydia, or say like a Skull Crown who is paired with Senesha. It also probably won't work against the Ice Golem minions, unfortunately. That would be kind of cool, but I'm pretty sure that that is based on a passive effect as well, their revival. So this is primarily going to be useful in PvP. Now finally, it says instantly activating Earth Puncture will not place the skill on cooldown. If there are multiple champions on the team with the skill, only one will activate. It is on a 1-turn cooldown when booked, but that's fine because it's an AoE attack, AoE buff strip, and AoE weaken. So you don't really need it to happen more than once in any given turn, probably. So if we take a quick look at the kit overall, it feels like the A1 is going to be highly useful potentially in PvP and maybe in Doom Tower, and also potentially in Hydra Clan Boss. We have an A2 that is definitely going to be valuable in all of those same places, PvP, Doom Tower, Hydra Clan Boss. We have an A3 that could potentially be valuable in all three of those places, Doom Tower, Hydra Clan Boss, and PvP. And then we have a passive that is probably only going to be valuable in Hydra Clan Boss, but could also be valuable in certain floors of Doom Tower where there are a lot of revivers. Finally, we have an aura that is arena focused, accuracy in arena battles by 70. So this champion feels like he's going to be fairly versatile. He's going to be usable in a lot of different places. Definitely in Doom Tower, definitely in Hydra Clan Boss, definitely in arena. And he's maybe specifically going to be a very good counter for certain kinds of teams in places like live arena or 3v3. UGIR the Wormeater feels to me like he's a very versatile champ, and he's got high value in high value content. I don't know that you would use him in Clan Boss, although you could, because he does bring a few debuffs and buffs that are useful there, but it feels more likely that he'll be used in the other places that I mentioned, Doom Tower, Hydra Clan Boss, and Arena. And in fact, because he is so versatile, he feels like this guy could be high value for anybody who's maybe in the early to mid game. I think at end game, chances are you're going to have champions that do a better job specializing in the things that he does. He's a versatility champ. So he may not be as valuable to late game and end game players unless you are specifically looking for an additional counter to revivers in live arena. If you are into live arena and you're at late game, this guy gives you another option specifically to counter Pytheon, right? Pytheon is the Lizardman reviver who's a legendary. So if we go look at him for a second, this is Pytheon, and Pytheon has this A3, which revives all dead allies and then places a strengthen buff on them. So as soon as he activates this skill in live arena, UGIR will strip that strengthen buff, turn it into a weaken buff, and hit everybody. So this is really going to limit Pytheon's effectiveness in arena, especially in live arena. So if you're looking for a counter, if you keep running into Pytheons and you're in the late game, I think UGIR gives you a very specific and very effective counter for this champion. I happen to use Pytheon a lot in live arena. I come up against them a lot in live arena, so I could see some high value there for endgame players, just specifically in live arena, and then maybe as a champion, UGIR as a champion who could go on a second or third Hydra team. So regardless of where you are in the game, I do think UGIR has value, but I think he'll bring the most value to players who are probably in the mid game because of his versatility. But the good news is he'll never run out of value. He's going to be a beast in faction crypts, and I think he's going to continue to be used in other places. So do I recommend going for this champion? I think I'm definitely going to go for him on my endgame account. On my noob versus pro account, which is only about 90 days in, not quite 90 days in, it would be tough to complete this fusion. If I can, I will make an assessment of my newer account and see if I can complete this fusion. Because he's so versatile and he's going to be so effective in so many places, I would like to get him, but I just may not have the resources to go for him. And so in order to figure that out, what we have to do now is take a look at the Fragment Event calendar. Now, there are 110 total fragments during the event, and you only need 100 to complete the summon for Ugar. Let me just move myself out of the way so you can see. Here it says there are 40 fragments from tournaments, 60 from events, and 10 from tournament leaderboards. Now, all 10 of the extra fragments are in the champion training tournament here from the 22nd to the 26th. Now, this matters because in the past, in champion training tournaments or any tournaments where you get extra fragments, those are typically split up. It is not 10 fragments to the winner. It is 5 to the winner and 5 to second place. So even though it says 110 total fragments, it may be that no player can get more than 105 fragments for this event. So if you're planning on trying to get those extra fragments from that tournament, realize that it's likely only going to be 5 extra fragments, not 10. And so that means you can only miss one event in total during this entire fragment event and still have a chance through those extra fragments of completing this fusion. If you do not win any extra fragments, you cannot miss a single event on this calendar in order to succeed at summoning Ugar. This is unusual. This is not typically how it's worked in the past. We always have some extra fragments, but the extra fragments in recent fusion events have come through summon rushes and champion chases. And as you can see here on this calendar, there's actually only one of those in the entire event. Okay, so right here is the summon rush. It's right at the beginning of the event, which is great, just one day in, so it'll start tomorrow. Now this coincides with the new progressive summoning event that Raid is launching. We'll talk about that in a different video. But so it feels like a good time for the summon rush. You will need all 20 points from the summon rush, so you will have to get all of the rewards in order to complete this fragment event. But there is no champion chase, and there is no second summon rush. So perhaps that's why there are no additional fragments. They've decided to make this a little bit more of a condensed fragment event and a little bit more streamlined. I'm actually for this change. I am happy that we just know exactly what's expected. If the point totals of any of these events are inflated from what is typical over the last few months, I will be upset. Because with no leeway, if we get to a summon rush and, you know, the point total for the final 10 fragments is like 5,000 points or 7,000 points or something crazy, then it's just going to put it out of the reach of too many players. So hopefully they maintain their system for the points that we've seen in the past few fusion events, and that should be at least manageable, even though it is inflated over what we were seeing, say, 6 months ago or a year ago. All right, so now let's actually break down our approach. Now, the things that we want to remember are, one, that tournaments for dungeons typically take about 2,000 energy. Dungeon Divers events typically take about 5,000 energy. Artifact enhancement events typically take about 20 million silver. A summon rush, I'm not sure where the point totals are going to be, but I would expect this to be roughly 6 sacreds. Classic arena takedown shouldn't be a problem. You should just do your daily tokens and that should be fine. And champion training events are highly variable based on your approach to how you do champion training, how much energy that you put into it, and how much triple dipping and quadruple dipping you can do during other events. Now, for the first Dungeon Divers event right here, we only have one tournament that is overlapping, and that is the Spider Tournament. So what I'm probably going to do is in the first day or two, probably, let's say by the end of Friday, I'm going to try to burn all 2,000 energy here for my Spider Tournament, leaving me with about 3,000 energies worth that I need to do in Dungeon Divers. Now, I could continue to do that in Spider Tournament, or I could do that anywhere else. And what I will probably do for the next day or so is burn as much energy as I can in campaign. So for this champion training event, I'm going to burn energy for about 24 hours in campaign. That's going to help me promote my champions for the champion training event. And it's also going to help me get some dungeon divers return. Now that will increase the overall energy that I need to put into dungeon divers, because campaign does not reward the same yield of points that the dungeon tournaments do in terms of dungeon divers points. So even though I am trying to double dip as much as possible here, this will probably increase my need for energy in this dungeon divers tournament. Now, the dragon tournament doesn't line up, unfortunately. But what I'm going to do is probably just start my dragon tournament early. I'm just going to get into dragon and start grinding some speed gear. And so in this last little bit here, this is where I'm going to finish off my dungeon divers tournament. Now, there is one additional thing you can do during this span of time to improve your efficiency a little bit, which is if you can farm spider tournament with food champions on your team. So if you can do, say, level 20 of spider with just 3 champions, and you can put 2 food champions in that team, that's going to let you get a little bit of extra champion training points from your 2000 spider energy. That's going to be a little bit more efficient. So I'm going to try to do that here in Dragon Tournament. I have a solo stage 20 Dragon team, so I can run 4 food champions in my Dragon Tournament, complete my 2000 energy, and get a ton of extra points here for the champion training event. Now, during this whole period, there will be an artifact enhancement event, and hopefully the gold that I've made from Spider Tournament and Dragon Tournament will cover my 20 million. I do suggest that you typically start with somewhere between 40 and 50% of the total silver you'll need for the fusion. So in this case, it looks like we have 3 artifact enhancement events, so you're going to need 60 million silver. So if you don't have at least 20 to 25 million to start with, you may struggle here. You can potentially get extra silver by continuing to farm Spider Tournament here to cover the rest of the dungeon divers, because Spider Tournament or Spider does reward more silver per run than Dragon, Ice Golem, and Fire Knight. You can also forge trash gear in the forge and sell that for extra silver. You can do a gear cleanse. You can do whatever you need to do to get the extra silver, but you're either going to have some silver saved up, or you may have to use some extra gems in, say, the Spider Tournament to make sure that you have the silver required to cover all 3 artifact enhancement events. Because remember, for this fragment event, we can't skip a single event. So you do need that 60 million silver. Okay, so one thing I'm noticing just now is, in fact, this second Dungeon Divers event. And that lines up with both the Dragon Tournament and the Ice Golem Tournament. So that's actually fairly friendly. So what I will do is probably I won't do Dragon during this period here. This one day, I will wait here until I get here, and I'll do the 2K here. And then I'll make sure to do the 2K for Ice Golem here during this period as well. And that means I will only need an additional 1,000 energy for Dungeon Divers. And I'll probably use that, in fact, in Dragon, simply because I think the Dragon drops are more valuable. And if I do it during this same period here, then they will give me extra points in the champion training event, because I'll be using all of that extra food with my solo Dragon team. The second champion training tournament will probably be just done in the tavern for me on my main account with a little bit in campaign, because it doesn't look like there's enough overlap with anything else going on to make that an easy one. So that's actually going to be fairly tricky, and that is the tournament one. So there's a decent chance I'm not going to win the tournament. But if I can get any double dipping or triple dipping from Ice Golem or anywhere else, then I will. Again, Classic Arena Takedown should be no problem. The Fire Knight tournament is just 2,000 energy, so not a huge problem. And the good news is, here at the end of the Fragment event, there aren't a lot of events going on. So basically, you're going to be getting your silver from Ice Golem. You're going to be getting your silver from Fire Knight. You're going to be getting your silver from Campaign for the Champion Training Tournament. And you're going to be using all that silver to complete these 2 artifact enhancement events. Now, there will not be a 2x event during this Fragment event, so no 2x Ancient Shards or anything like that. I think that we're skipping over a 2x event this weekend for the progressive shard pull event. And that means that after this event ends, 2 days after this event ends, that following Friday should be the next 2x event. Could be voids, could be ancients, we have no idea. They are messing with that schedule quite a bit right now. And with the holidays coming up, they may mess with it even more. Okay, so that's my plan. You can consider whether or not you have the resources available if I'm looking at the energy totals, I will probably need something in the vicinity of maybe 18,000 energy over the course of these 14 days. That's a lot of energy per day. Because it is a shorter event, that means we're looking at roughly 1,300 energy a day or so that we have to burn through. And it's not going to be consistent every day. There are going to be times where you're going to want to burn hotter and faster than that, and other times where you can slow down a little bit. So make sure you work out your fusion plan to see if you can in fact go after Ugar the Wormeater if you are interested in doing so. Okay, so that is it for this one. I do think this is a pretty good champ. I don't think he's a must fuse, but if you are in the mid game, you should seriously consider it. If this is your first fusion event, remember there are no consolation prizes in a fragment event. When you have a fusion event that has epics and rares, you can always collect some of those, and that can be a consolation prize. But in a fragment event, it's either get all the fragments or fail. And there's nothing that feels worse than getting 95 fragments in a fragment event and not completing that champion. So definitely do your planning. Make sure that you have the resources and the time available over the next 2 weeks to actually complete this event. Remember, for those of you in the US, that this is a holiday period. We've got Thanksgiving coming, and I know that that's going to be tricky for me. I'm still going to try to pull this off because I think I can do it. But there are going to be 2 or 3 days there in the middle of this fragment event that are going to be a little bit tricky. All right, so please, in the comments below, let me know, do you think this guy is valuable? Will you be going for him? And if you are, where are you in the game? Do you think he has value at endgame? Do you think he's more of a progression champion? Or do you think potentially he's both? And so it's just good value and a good investment to go after this champion. Or maybe you think he's awful, and you can tell me that too. Before you go, don't forget to hit the like button for this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and consider joining our Discord community. All right, thanks for hanging out. I've been Colred, and I will see you in another video soon.